Joining us now live is Democratic Congressman Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He co-authored a House resolution that would put limits on the administration's authority. Before we talk about that proposal, Congressman, I want to get your reaction to the fact that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee passed a resolution, 10-7, bipartisan vote both for and against. And while doing it, they added an amendment from Senators McCain and Coons that would make it U.S. policy to change the momentum. That is, in effect, increasing the authority of what the U.S. should do, whereas your legislation is hemming it in quite a bit. Does this make it more difficult for you to pass something in the House that would coincide, that would align with what passed in the Senate committee today?
So the issue, Jake, is whether that legislation that the Senate Foreign Relations Committee put in this bill authorizes the president to use military force for those purposes that he said, which is to try and change the balance in the Syrian civil war. That is not the purpose that the president has articulated. And so that should not be the purpose of the authorization of use of force. What I don't know, because I haven't seen the whole thing in context, is whether it's an authorization to use force for this purpose or it's a separate statement of U.S. policy. After all, the president has said that our objective ultimately is to get rid of the Assad regime. But he's been very clear, the president, that that's not the purpose of this military intervention. He wants to use it by supporting some of the rebel groups that have been vetted. So I have to look at this in context.
In context, absolutely. Your bill, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it would essentially make it illegal for the U.S. to deploy troops in the ground.
Yes.
It would also limit the president's authority to one round of strikes carried out over a 60-day period. And there are also some limits as to what kind of military action the U.S. could rely on to stop Syria's regime from using chemical weapons. It's hemming in the president's authority to wage war, even though they initially requested the White House, as every White House does, fairly expansive powers.
Yes, they were really looking for really a partial blank check. And as you said, presidents tend to do that. Just one clarification, because there are separate restrictions here. Yes, we have a 60-day expiration date, but we also have another important provision that says after the initial use of military force, after the initial punitive attacks, if the Assad regime does not use chemical weapons again, if the president cannot certify to Congress that he has used chemical weapons again, then we may not, then we're not able to take follow-on military action. In other words, the purpose, as articulated clearly by the president, deter the Assad regime from using chemical weapons. If after the initial military strike, Assad does not use chemical weapons, what we're proposing is there be no authority to continue American military action.
You heard Secretary Kerry just say that this is not war. I interviewed two generals yesterday who said, well, you know, we haven't actually formally declared war since World War II, but Korea, Vietnam, Iraq I, Iraq II, Afghanistan, you can call them whatever you want, they're wars. This is an act of war against a sovereign country. Attacking them with missiles, whatever the reason. Do you buy this explanation, this statement from the administration that this is not war?
Well, I accept what Secretary Kerry said, which is this is certainly not war in the sense that we're mobilizing all the forces of the United States to go after and replace a government or anything like that. This is much more like the Libya action. In fact, I envision, at least based on the president's comments today, that the military action taken in Syria would be much more confined in both scope and time than the Libya action. So our resolution that Connolly and I, Congressman Connolly, have put forward is designed to make sure that that is the exclusive purpose, that it is designed only to achieve the mission articulated by the president and limit that scope of action.
Can a war resolution get through this House?
I don't think anybody knows right now, Jake. I think you've been listening to these hearings. You hear lots of views. The American people are going to be
on the left and the right, both.
And it's understandable, and a lot of this is the shadow overhanging from the Iraq situation, where we both went to war on false pretenses, that there were chemical weapons and weapons of mass destruction, and the fact that we ended up being there for a prolonged period of time at great cost. The evidence is very different in this case. It's very clear that the Assad regime used chemical weapons, and the whole purpose of the amendments, the way to change the president's resolution that we're proposing, is to make sure that there's no way we get engaged in large-scale military activity in Syria.
All right, Congressman Chris Van Hollen, Democrat of Maryland, thank you so much. Thanks for coming.